Okay, this is my crazy mercantilism graph. If you look on the left side, you see France, and that is the mother country. And France is going to colonize or take over Haiti. But why did it do this? Well, it's because of this basic principle of mercantilism, this economic system, which is you get cheap raw materials. In Haiti's case, that would have been probably sugar, and then you create a more expensive manufactured goods, and of course, when you sell that, you're going to make more money than people who have who sell raw material. But not only that, you can sell it back to Haiti and have a kind of captured market. Now, if you look at the bottom of this picture, you see Britain. Now, Britain would like to have the same relationship with Haiti, but it's blocked off by France with tariffs. So that encourages Britain to go out and get a different colony, and that's what it did. It went out and got Jamaica. And this kind of fuels not only economic growth for the Europeans, but also their desire for more colonies. As you probably remember from econ class when you were a freshman, capitalism is when private individuals and businesses offer goods and services on a free market without government intervention. And so the private parties, private individuals, private businesses own all the means of production. So they own the labor, they're entrepreneurs, they own the capital, and they own the natural resources. So in this time in Europe, private capitalism was really funding the expansion into Europe, but also starting to grow the economy in Europe itself. It was through private means that the European economy grew, not the government. We're about to talk about something called the putting out system, and it's not what you think it is. The putting out system is a new way of manufacturing things. Before this time period in Europe, most things, if you had to be skilled labor or if there needed to be special tools, they were made in the city. But in this time period, they start to move manufacturing out of the cities and actually back to the countryside. So they're putting it out of the cities because farmers and peasants are always in need of extra cash. They were willing to start making things on the side in between being farmers. And this is a beginning of a big economic change in Europe. Because of capitalism, with its mercantilism and the putting out system and all these other things, these joint stock companies, wealth is going to come into Europe in a way it never had before. And this is going to trickle into the rural settings, into those agricultural communities that have been around now for centuries, where serfs were tied to the land. And the individual peasant is going to become richer and able to buy more things and maybe save some money so they could leave and go live in the towns and the cities. And a lot of them are going to move. This is going to bring about a shift in the labor system in Europe. So serfdom is going to be abandoned, and people who work on the land are going to be paid more because they're more valuable because there's less of them. That's almost everywhere in Europe except Russia. And it's also going to bring big changes to the family. When Europe was dominated by an agricultural economy, most people lived with their extended family. That means their parents, but also their grandparents, their cousins, and uncles. When people start moving to towns, families are not as useful as they once were. They won't help you make money as they did on a farm. And so people started to move towards more nuclear families. That means a mom and a dad and the kids. Many of you might remember this man, Adam Smith. And Adam Smith wrote a very important book or pamphlet called The Inquiry and the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. It was written in 1776, which was kind of an important year for us here in America, not only because of that Declaration of Independence, but also because Adam Smith really laid down the ideas of supply and demand and a market economy. If you remember from econ class, he called it the invisible hand guiding the market. What moves this invisible hand is self-interest, as can be seen in this quote from Wealth of Nations. Despite Adam Smith's ideas about capitalism, there were some negative side effects to all this economic change. There was a rise in crime, as well as there was more witch hunting, which had a lot to do with religion, but also had to do with economic tensions. Before this scientific revolution, most Europeans believed in this ancient Greek scholars named Ptolemy, not related to the Ptolemaic Empire, who felt that the Earth was the center of the solar system and the sun and all the planets revolved around us. This is called geocentric. Well, then came this guy, Copernicus. He was a Polish astronomer, and he observed the Earth and made calculations and discovered that we are not geocentric, but heliocentric. In other words, we revolve around the sun. And this was a big deal, especially for the Catholic Church, which used our position in the world to explain the importance of man in the eyes of God. Two other scientists, Kepler and Galileo Galilei, reaffirm and reinforce the model put out by Copernicus. And then we have this guy, Isaac Newton. You may have heard the story about the apple hitting him on the head, but it probably isn't true. What is true is that he revolutionized the science of physics and wrote down many of the laws that many of you still have to study when you take physics. But also, he did a lot of investigation into light and wrote some really important work about how light is separated and how light waves work. If you were smart in the Middle Ages, you probably studied this guy, Aristotle. And he was really the focus of much of the educational system of the Middle Ages. But then in this time period, once we start going into a more global society, there start to be new philosophers like John Locke. John Locke was an Englishman and a philosopher. He started writing right around the time of the Glorious Revolution, when there were limits put on the King and the Queen of England. One of his two most notable writings is something called the Essay Concerning Human Understanding. In it, he writes about something, an older idea, that human beings are born a blank slate. And from there, we learn. And we are capable of learning. This quote represents that idea. His other major work was the Two Treaties of Government, where he lays out the ideas of what we now call a social contract. The first part of this contract is that all human beings, or all men, are born with certain rights. He called them basically natural rights. And you would recognize them because they are life, liberty. No, I know you were thinking something else. It's actually property. Life, liberty, and property. The second part was that if your government doesn't ensure your natural rights, you have the right to revolt and overthrow the government, which is really important for us here in America because these are the ideas that Thomas Jefferson read and put into the Declaration of Independence. This philosophical movement started with Locke and a couple other people, really takes off and grows in France. And that movement is called the Enlightenment. In France, these philosophers were called philosophes, so it's spelled correctly there without an R. And probably one of the most famous is a guy named Voltaire. And Voltaire was kind of a funny guy, and he had a lot of things he wanted to express. Voltaire was anti-aristocracy, he was anti-organized religion, but he was pro-free speech. He also was fond of science, and he wrote novels, and his most famous novel is Candide, which is a satire. Voltaire was the kind of guy who liked to make fun of people in power, to point out what was wrong with them. And that sometimes got him in trouble. He most famously was put in jail in the notorious prison, the Bastille, which later on is going to play a big role in French history. This is probably why Voltaire was such a big fan of free speech. He famously said, "I disapprove of what you say, but I defend your right to say it." A popular idea amongst Enlightenment philosophers was the belief in deism. And what deism is God is not this big, all-powerful, all-knowing creature. Instead, he's more like a clockmaker. And a clockmaker, if you've ever looked inside a clock, it's very complicated, all these little parts. And he sets it all up and just lets it run. So he's not involved in our day-to-day affairs. He's simply established a system that is rational and logical, but complicated. The last really big idea in the Enlightenment was the idea of progress. They believed through science and rational thought that human beings could get ahead.